My brother has always seen me as a footnote in his own grand story, a supporting character whose only role was to make him look better by comparison. So when he stood up at his wedding rehearsal dinner, glass in hand, and called me his poor best man in front of everyone we've ever known, I can't say I was surprised. It was the same old song, just played on a more expensive violin, but he didn't know something. He didn't know that for the past 2 years, I had been meticulously helping his brilliant, beautiful new bride prepare for this exact moment. He thought my toast the next night would be a forgettable formality. He was wrong. It was going to be about his new bride's old life, a life he thought he had successfully buried and stolen. Have you ever had to smile while someone you love is being destroyed by people who are supposed to care about you? Let me know your story down in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe because you are not going to want to miss how this ends. It all started, as most family tragedies do, with a brilliant idea that wasn't my brother's. My family, the Prestons, are what you might call new money, but they wear it like ancient royalty. My father fancies himself a titan of industry, my mother a grand dame of local society, and my older brother Mark the crown prince destined to inherit it all. Their kingdom is built on Preston Innovations, a boutique marketing and branding firm that seemingly burst onto the scene out of nowhere 5 years ago, landing massive clients and accumulating wealth at a speed that left everyone breathless. They prided themselves on their innate sense of style, their killer instincts for what the market wanted. They love to talk about the Preston touch, a mythical quality that supposedly infused every logo, every campaign, every pixel of their corporate identity. And at the center of it all was the company's core logo, a sleek, minimalist design that was hailed in trade magazines as a stroke of pure genius. That logo and the entire brand Bible that came with it was the bedrock of their empire, and it was all a lie. The genius behind it wasn't my father, and it certainly wasn't my brother. It was the woman now standing beside Mark at that rehearsal dinner, smiling a beautiful, strained smile. Her name is Chloe, and long before she was Mark's fiancée, she was my friend. And I watched my family steal her future. The condescension from my family wasn't a new phenomenon. It was the very air I breathed in our cavernous, joyless home. From a young age, Mark was the sun, and I was a distant, vaguely disappointing planet. He was the athlete, the charmer, the one who could walk into a room and command it. I was the quiet one, the reader, the kid who was more interested in taking apart our first computer than in playing catch. My father, a man who measures worth in stock prices and handshake deals, would clap Mark on the back for a C in economics while shaking his head at my straight A's in computer science. "Binary code isn't going to buy you a house, Alex," he'd say, a phrase that became a recurring chorus throughout my life. They steered me towards what they considered practical paths, but their definition of practical was laughably narrow. It meant finance, law, or following in my father's footsteps. My fascination with the intricate architecture of the digital world was a source of constant, casual mockery. They called it my nerdy hobby. When I told them I was majoring in digital forensics and cybersecurity with a special focus on intellectual property law, they looked at me with a mixture of pity and bewilderment. "So, you want to be a computer cop?" Mark had sneered over a family dinner to the amusement of my parents. "While I'm out there building an empire, you'll be in a dark room looking for..." "What? Digital fingerprints?" He laughed and my parents joined in. That was the dynamic. Mark, the builder of empires. Alex, the chaser of digital ghosts. They couldn't grasp that the world they were so eager to conquer was built on the very principles I was studying. They saw ownership as physical, tangible things. Real estate, stock certificates, luxury cars. The idea of owning an idea, a string of code, or a collection of pixels was completely alien to them. It was this fundamental blindness, this arrogant dismissal of the intangible, that would become their undoing. And it was this nerdy hobby of mine that would ultimately provide the weapon Chloe and I so desperately needed. They thought my world was small and insignificant, a realm of ones and zeros that had no bearing on their real-world ambitions. They never once stopped to consider that in the modern age, the most valuable empires are not built on brick and mortar, but on ideas. And ideas, as they were about to learn, can be stolen, but they can also be reclaimed. I met Chloe in a sophomore year elective, The History of Visual Communication. While I was there to understand the historical context of data visualization, she was there because design was in her soul. She was incandescently brilliant. Her projects weren't just good, they were revolutionary. She had a way of seeing the world, of deconstructing it into color palettes and font types that was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. She could distill a complex idea into a single, breathtakingly simple image. We became friends, study partners bonded by a shared appreciation for the elegance of a well-designed system, whether it was a piece of code or a corporate logo. I remember spending hours in the university library with her, watching as she filled sketchbooks with designs that were smarter, cleaner, and more evocative than anything I'd seen in the professional world. Her final project for that class was a complete top-to-bottom branding portfolio for a fictional company. She called it Aura. The logo, a mesmerizingly simple and elegant design, was the centerpiece. She created everything. Letterheads, brand guidelines, digital mock-ups, even a full-fledged marketing campaign concept. It was a masterpiece, and she got a perfect score, but more than that, you could just feel that it was special. A year later, she started dating my brother, Mark. I had reservations, of course. Mark had a way of collecting beautiful things, and I worried he saw Chloe as another acquisition. But she was smitten, and for a while they seemed happy. He was charmed by her creativity, even if he didn't understand it. He called her his artsy girlfriend, a label that was both affectionate and deeply condescending. The first true alarm bell rang about a year into their relationship. Mark, who had recently been installed by my father as the head of a new innovation division at his otherwise unremarkable consulting firm, came to Chloe with a proposition. He was supposed to be spearheading a major rebranding effort, a way to launch the old family business into the modern era. He told her he was completely stumped. He laid it on thick, praising her talent, telling her she had the kind of vision they desperately needed. He asked if he could borrow her old Aura portfolio from college just for inspiration. The theft wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a slow, creeping poison. Chloe, trusting and in love, was hesitant at first. That portfolio was her baby, the culmination of her unique vision. But Mark was persuasive. He wasn't asking to use it, he assured her, just to get his own creative juices flowing. He said my father was putting immense pressure on him and he was in over his head. "You just have such a brilliant eye, babe," he'd said, his voice dripping with the faux sincerity he was so good at. "I just want to get inside that amazing brain of yours for a bit. See how you think." Reluctantly, she agreed. She gave him her old laptop and the physical portfolio, the beautiful leather-bound book she'd spent weeks assembling. A week later, at a family dinner, my father announced that Mark had presented a new branding concept that was absolutely world-class. He was beaming, talking about how Mark had a natural gift, the Preston touch. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. A few days later, I saw a preliminary design on my father's desk. It was Chloe's Aura logo, virtually unchanged, with the name Preston Innovations slapped underneath it. It was so blatant, so shameless, it took my breath away. The color scheme was identical. The font family was the one she'd painstakingly selected. The entire visual language was hers. They had lifted it wholesale from the portfolio she had naively handed over for inspiration. When I confronted Mark about it, he just shrugged. "It was a jumping-off point," he said, not even making eye contact. "We've changed a few things. It's a totally different entity now." But it wasn't. It was a carbon copy. He had taken her soul and signed his name on it. The slow burn theft continued for months. They rolled out the new branding piece by piece, and with each new unveiling, another piece of Chloe's work was stolen and rebranded as Mark's. The website, the business cards, the corporate headquarters lobby signage, it was all her. They were building their empire on a foundation of her stolen genius, and the world was applauding them for it. They were praised for their bold new vision, and Mark was hailed as a young visionary. He soaked it all up, the praise, the accolades, the magazine features. He started to believe his own lie, talking about the late nights he'd spent agonizing over the design, the spark of inspiration that led to the final concept. He never mentioned Chloe. Her name was erased from her own story. The day Chloe finally saw the full scope of the theft is seared into my memory. Mark had been featured in a glossy business magazine, a multi-page spread celebrating the meteoric rise of Preston Innovations. He had brought a copy to her apartment, beaming with pride, expecting her to be thrilled for him. The centerpiece of the article was a full-page reproduction of the company's brand identity guide. There, in black and white, was her entire Aura project presented as Mark's magnum opus. The layout, the specific RGB color codes, the typographic rule set was all there. I was there that evening, having stopped by to help her with a computer issue. I saw the color drain from her face as she flipped through the pages. The smile froze and then crumbled. She looked at Mark, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and profound hurt. This is my project?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mark, this is everything. You said it was just for inspiration." Mark's reaction was a masterclass in gaslighting. He feigned confusion, then indignation. "Babe, we've been over this," he said, his tone shifting from celebratory to annoyed. "I was inspired by your talent, of course. But my team and I worked for months to develop this. You can't take credit for our hard work." He made her feel like she was crazy, like she was being unreasonable and hysterical. When she pointed to the logo, the exact same logo from her sketchbook, he said, "It's a circle and some lines, Chloe." Nobody owns circles. He belittled her, minimized her contribution until it was nothing, a footnote, a ghost of an idea he had graciously elevated into something real. Later that night, after a devastated Mark had left, I sat with her as she cried. The full weight of the betrayal had crashed down upon her. It wasn't just about a logo. It was about her identity, her art, the very essence of her talent, which had been stolen and monetized by the man she loved and his family. That's when I saw the shift in her. The hurt was still there, a raw, open wound, but beneath it, a new fire was kindling, the cold, hard flame of anger. The discussion then turned to his parents. They were even worse. When Chloe, at Mark's tearful insistence, tried to broach the subject with them, my mother simply said, "My dear, you should be proud that you could inspire Mark to such heights. A good woman is the inspiration behind every great man." My father was more direct. "Let's be clear," he'd said, his voice cold and businesslike. "What you did was a college project. What we've built is a multi-million-dollar enterprise. They are not the same thing. You are part of the family now, or you will be soon. Don't cause trouble." The promise came cloaked in the language of love and family unity, but it was a cage. After the initial disastrous confrontations, when Chloe refused to simply accept the erasure of her work, Mark and my parents shifted their strategy. The gaslighting hadn't completely worked, and her quiet, simmering anger was clearly making them nervous. They couldn't afford for the real story to come out, not now that Preston Innovations was their entire identity and source of wealth. So, they gathered for a family meeting at my parents' house, a carefully staged event designed to soothe and subdue. I was there, a silent observer. They sat Chloe down on the expensive leather couch, flanked by Mark, who held her hand in a grip that looked more like restraint than affection. My father adopted his most paternal, magnanimous tone. "Chloe," he began, "we want you to know that we see you as a daughter. Your talent is immense, and we value it. We value you." He spoke of the future, of the wedding, of the beautiful life she and Mark would build together. He acknowledged that the rollout of the branding was perhaps handled hastily. He never used the word stolen. He used words like miscommunication, overzealousness, the speed of business. Then came the hook. "Once you and Mark are married," my father said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming with false sincerity, "once you are officially a Preston, we want to make things right. We will bring you into the company. We'll give you a title, a stake in the business. We'll issue a press release talking about your foundational role in the design concept. But it has to be done carefully, at the right time, after the wedding. Once we're all truly family, we can present a united front." My mother chimed in, talking about how messy it would look to the public if this came out now, how it would undermine Mark and everything they'd built. "Think of your future, dear," she cooed. "This is about protecting the family, your family. It was a classic manipulation tactic. Delay, promise, and bind her to them with the sacred vow of marriage." They were asking her to trade her silence for a future reward, a reward they would control completely. They were betting that the wedding, the social pressure, the desire for a happy life with Mark would be enough to make her compliant. They wanted to legally bind her to the family whose fortune was built on her stolen work before they even considered giving her a sliver of credit. They believed they had all the power, that her love for Mark was their ultimate trump card. And as Chloe sat there, nodding slowly, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, they thought they had won. They mistook her silence for acceptance. They had no idea it was the beginning of a war. It was in the sterile quiet of the university's digital forensics lab that I found my purpose. While my family was busy building their glossy empire on a foundation of lies, I was learning how to dismantle them. I fell in love with the unshakable logic of data. A timestamp on a server doesn't lie. A hidden metadata tag doesn't care about social pressure. A digital watermark embedded deep within the pixel structure of an image is a silent, incorruptible witness. My family's mockery of my chosen field was relentless. At holiday dinners, my father would hold court, boasting about Mark's latest deal, the new client he'd landed, the expansion of their office. Then he'd turn to me, a dismissive wave of his hand. "And Alex is still playing with his computers, right? Figuring out who stole the cookie from the digital cookie jar?" The laughter always followed, loud and self-congratulatory. They saw my work as trivial, a child's game. They lived in a world of bravado and bluster, where truth was whatever you could convince people to believe. The irony was a constant, bitter taste in my mouth. They would belittle my understanding of copyright law one moment, and in the next, praise the inviolable strength of their company's trademark, a trademark that was legally, morally, and ethically fraudulent. Mark was the worst. He had fully internalized their belief that my skills were useless. "Seriously, little brother," he'd say, draping an arm over my shoulder in a display of faux brotherly concern. "When are you going to get a real job? You're too smart to be wasting your time on all this nerdy stuff. Nobody cares about digital water coolers or whatever you call them." That was his favorite name for it, digital water coolers. He thought it was hilarious. It was this profound, arrogant ignorance that gave us our opening. They never suspected that the nerdy stuff they mocked was the very language in which their crime was written. They believed that because they had the physical portfolio and had plastered the designs everywhere, they owned them. They had no concept of the digital breadcrumbs, the invisible trail of evidence that every creator leaves behind. They didn't know that Chloe, as part of her meticulous design process, had always embedded tiny, almost invisible watermarks in her original Philesa habit she'd picked up from a professor who was paranoid about plagiarism. They didn't know that old emails could be recovered, that server logs could be analyzed, that the creation dates on her original Adobe Illustrator files were immutable proof of her authorship. They saw me as the poor brother, the one who didn't understand how the real world worked. They were about to get a very expensive education. The night after the family meeting, the night they thought they had successfully caged her with their empty promises, Chloe came to my apartment. The tears were gone, replaced by a chillingly calm resolve. "They're never going to make it right, are they?" she said. It wasn't a question. We both knew the answer. Their promise was an anesthetic, meant to keep her docile until she was legally bound to them, until it would be too messy and too self-destructive for her to fight back. "No," I said quietly. "They won't." "They think they've already won." She sat on my worn-out sofa, a stark contrast to the opulent prison of my parents' home, and looked at me, her eyes searching my face. "Your brother," she began, "he talked about your nerdy hobby, about digital watermarking and things like that. Is it real? Can you actually find proof?" And that was the moment the alliance was forged. The spark that had been kindled by their betrayal now had a path to become an inferno. I explained everything to her. I told her that ownership isn't determined by who shouts the loudest or who has the glossiest magazine spread. It's determined by evidence. I laid out a plan, a quiet, meticulous campaign to be waged in the shadows, far from the prying eyes of my family. I told her it would be a long and arduous process, that we would need to be patient and disciplined. They control the narrative, I explained, but we can control the facts. And in the end, the facts are all that matter. We would begin by unearthing every shred of digital evidence. We needed her original files, the ones with the embedded watermarks, and the original creation timestamps. We needed to find the old emails where she had sent preliminary designs to friends for feedback, long before Mark was ever in the picture. We needed to build an unshakable, chronological timeline of her creative process that would predate the existence of Preston Innovations by years. Then, armed with that evidence, we would quietly and methodically file for the copyrights and trademarks to every single asset. The logo, the brand name, the color palettes, the typographic standard Severi element she had created, we would legally claim ownership of the very foundation her new family's empire was built on. She listened, her expression growing more determined with every word. This was a language she understood. Strategy, precision, building a case. For the first time since the theft, she saw a path forward that wasn't paved with submission and silent resentment. "They think you're the poor brother," she said, a faint wry smile on her lips. "And they think I'm just the artsy girlfriend who should be grateful." "They have no idea who they're dealing with, do they?" "No," I replied, feeling a surge of adrenaline, of purpose, that I hadn't felt in years. "They don't." The next 2 years were a masterclass in clandestine operations. On the surface, nothing changed. I finished my degree, got a respectable, but, in my family's eyes, unimpressive job with a cybersecurity firm. Chloe continued to plan her wedding to Mark, playing the role of the devoted, happy fiancé. She attended the endless parties, the dress fittings, the cake tastings, all while carrying this monumental secret. Our work was done in stolen hours, late at night, in the quiet sanctuary of my small apartment, which we turned into our war room. The first and most crucial step was recovering her original files. The laptop she had loaned Mark was long gone lost, he claimed in an office move, but Chloe was a meticulous archivist of her own work. We spent a weekend painstakingly going through old, dusty external hard drives that she'd kept in storage. My heart pounded in my chest as I ran data recovery software on a drive from her sophomore year of college. And then, there it was. A folder labeled Aura Project Final. Inside, dozens of Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop files. I held my breath as I opened the main logo file. I zoomed in, pushing the magnification to its limit, and ran a steganography analysis program I had written myself. And there it was, hidden in the pixel data of the bottom curve of the logo, so small it was invisible to the naked eye, her initials CM and the creation date. It was the digital equivalent of a signed confession. We had our smoking gun. From there, we built our case, brick by brick. We unearthed emails she had sent to our old design professor, asking for feedback on the Aura concept, timestamped 2 years before Preston Innovations was even a registered business name. We found chat logs with college friends, where she described the logo in detail. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of their lie. I taught her how to document everything, how to preserve the metadata, how to create a forensically sound archive of her own intellectual property. She was a quick study, her designer's eye for detail proving invaluable. While she was picking out floral arrangements with my mother, she was also secretly on the phone with the copyright office, guided by my notes. While she was smiling for engagement photos, she was also having a new, hidden watermark algorithmically applied to all her digital assets, making them traceable no matter where they were used online. It was an exhausting double life. The dramatic irony was a constant companion. I'd sit through family dinners where my father would pontificate about the importance of brand integrity, all while the true owner of that brand sat across the table, quietly plotting to take it all back. Mark would brag about a new client they'd landed, a deal worth millions, all thanks to the power of his designs. Chloe and I would exchange a fleeting, imperceptible glance over the wine glasses, a silent acknowledgement of the storm that was coming. They were so confident, so secure in their stolen castle that they never once looked over their shoulders. They never suspected that the two people they dismissed as the poor brother and the artsy girlfriend were methodically dismantling their entire world, one legal filing at a time. The wedding weekend arrived like a ticking time bomb. The venue was a sprawling, obscenely expensive country estate, every detail curated to project an image of effortless wealth and class, an image paid for entirely by the profits from Chloe's stolen creativity. As guests arrived, cooing over the Preston Innovations branding that was subtly woven into everything from the welcome baskets to the cocktail napkins, the irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Chloe was a vision of calm radiance, playing her part to perfection. Only I could see the steel in her spine, the quiet resolve in her eyes. We had a final, brief meeting the morning of the rehearsal dinner, hidden away in a small garden alcove. All the filings are complete, I told her, my voice low. The copyrights are registered in your name. The trademarks are pending, but have a priority date that predates theirs. The cease and desist letters are drafted and addressed to my father, Mark, and the company's board. They are scheduled to be sent by our lawyer via courier on Monday morning. She took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly as she smoothed down the fabric of her dress. And the watermarks? She asked. I checked their corporate site again last night. I confirmed. The new ones are embedded in every single logo and image file they're using. We can track them, prove they are the exact files from your archive. This was it. 2 years of silent, meticulous work, all leading to this weekend. We had built an ironclad, legally unimpeachable case. The entire Preston Innovations brand, the engine of my family's wealth and status, legally belonged to her. They just didn't know it yet. The rehearsal dinner was an agonizing spectacle. My parents floated through the room, accepting congratulations, their faces alight with smug satisfaction. My father gave a speech, rambling on about legacy and building something that lasts. He looked at Mark with such profound pride it made me physically ill. He spoke of Mark's vision and innate talent, the same tired lies they had all come to believe. And then it was Mark's turn to speak. He stood up, handsome and confident in his custom-tailored suit. He talked about his love for Chloe, his excitement for their future. And then he turned his attention to me. I've got to give a shout out to my best man, my little brother Alex, he said, and the whole room turned to look at me. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, all aware of my status as the family's resident underachiever. He's not like the rest of us, Mark continued, a smirk playing on his lips. He's never cared much for business or making money. He's happy in his own little world of computers. He's proof that you don't need a fat wallet to be a good guy. My poor best man, ladies and gentlemen! A wave of polite, pitying laughter rippled through the room. My mother gave me a tight, sympathetic smile. My father shook his head with a look of fond exasperation. It was meant to be a light-hearted jab, a bit of brotherly roasting. But for me, it was the final match thrown on a pyre that had been building for years. It crystallized everything, their condescension, their willful blindness, their complete and utter dismissal of who I was and what I was capable of. Poor, he called me poor, he had no idea. I looked across the room and met Chloe's gaze. Her eyes were like chips of ice. The last shred of doubt, of hesitation, vanished. There was no turning back. The day of the wedding was a study in surrealism. I went through the motions, a ghost in a tuxedo. I stood beside Mark at the altar, watching as he looked at Chloe with what he and everyone else believed was love. But I knew it was the look of a conqueror admiring his most prized possession. Chloe floated down the aisle, a breathtaking vision in white, but her beauty was a Trojan horse, concealing an army of legal documents and righteous fury. I saw her glance at me as she reached the altar, a barely perceptible nod. The signal was sent. The plan was in motion. The ceremony was beautiful and hollow. The vows of love and trust were a bitter parody. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife and the crowd erupted in joyous applause, I felt a profound sense of dread and exhilaration. The ink was barely dry on the marriage license, the final piece of their manipulative puzzle clicking into place. They thought they had her now, that she was truly one of them, her fate intertwined with theirs. The reception was even more grandiose. A live band played, champagne flowed like water, and my father walked around with his chest puffed out, accepting backpats and congratulations on a successful merger of family and business. The entire event felt like a celebration of a crime. Every toast, every cheer was a testament to their successful heist. I spent most of the cocktail hour avoiding my relatives, who all seemed to have the same script. "So, Alex," an uncle would begin, "still doing that computer thing? Mark is just killing it, isn't he?" What a visionary. I would just nod and smile, a placid, agreeable mask hiding the swirling chaos inside me. The dramatic irony was a physical weight. I would watch my mother show off the wedding invitations to a friend, gushing about the genius logo Mark had designed, and I would feel a jolt, a secret thrill, knowing that the copyright for that very logo was sitting in a file in our lawyer's office under Chloe's name. I overheard my father telling a business associate that the Preston Innovations brand is our most valuable asset. It's ironclad. I had to stifle a laugh. It was ironclad, all right. Just not for him. Chloe was masterful. She was the happy bride, laughing, dancing, thanking guests. But during a quiet moment, when we passed each other near the ballroom entrance, she whispered, "Are you ready?" Her voice was steady, her eyes clear. "They have no idea what's coming," I whispered back. She squeezed my hand, a brief, firm gesture of solidarity. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was ours. They had belittled her talent and my intelligence, dismissed us both as insignificant. They built their world on top of us. Tonight, we were going to show them what it felt like when the foundation crumbled. As the dinner plates were cleared and the dessert course was served, the clinking of a knife against a glass signaled the start of the speeches. The maid of honor, Chloe's sister, gave a sweet, tearful toast. Then, a few of Mark's groomsmen, his college buddies, shared some generic, boisterous anecdotes. The atmosphere was light, celebratory, full of warmth and affection. The room was a sea of smiling faces, lulled into a sense of communal joy. And then, it was my turn. The MC announced, "And now, a few words from our best man, the groom's brother, Alex Preston." A polite round of applause followed me as I made my way from my table to the small stage where the microphone stood. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the smooth jazz playing softly in the background. My hands were slick with sweat as I adjusted the microphone stand. I looked out at the expectant faces. My parents, beaming with a sort of weary pride. My relatives, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and low expectations. And at the head table, Mark, giving me a thumbs up and a wide, confident grin, completely oblivious. Beside him, Chloe sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of bridal serenity. But I saw it. The almost imperceptible tension in her jaw, the laser focus in her eyes. She was watching me, waiting. I fumbled with my note cards, a deliberate bit of theater to play into their perception of me as the awkward, bumbling brother. "Wow, big crowd," I started, my voice intentionally a little shaky. "Mark, Chloe, what a day. Just beautiful. Everything is perfect." I looked directly at Mark. Last night, Mark called me his poor best man. And you know he's not wrong. In the way he and my father measure wealth in terms of dollars and cents and stock portfolios, I guess I am. I've never been very good at that game. A few sympathetic titters from the crowd. My mother's smile tightened. Mark's grin became a little more condescending. He thought he knew exactly where this was going, a self-deprecating, slightly pathetic speech that would make him look magnanimous for even including me in his wedding. He leaned over and whispered something to Chloe, who didn't react. He was settling in to enjoy the show, to bask in the glow of his own perceived superiority. He had no idea that the show was for him, and the price of admission was everything he held dear. I took a deep breath, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment longer than was comfortable. I looked away from my brother and let my gaze sweep across the room, past the lavish floral arrangements and the glittering chandeliers, all fruits of a poison tree. Then I looked at Chloe. "I've been thinking a lot about wealth lately," I continued, my voice finding a new, steadier rhythm. And I've been thinking about Chloe's old life before she met Mark, before she was set to become a Preston. I saw a flicker of alarm in my mother's eyes. Mark's smile faltered. The room grew quiet, the atmosphere shifting from celebratory to tense. The audience could feel the change in tone. They leaned forward, sensing that this was not going to be the standard best man's toast. They thought I was about to reveal some sordid secret from Chloe's past, some youthful indiscretion. I could see the guests exchanging nervous glances. This was the misleading premise, the moment of misdirection. I was letting them think I was about to commit a massive social faux pas to humiliate the bride on her wedding day. My father's expression darkened. He looked like he was about to stand up and wrestle the microphone away from me. "You see," I said, my voice now clear and resonant in the silent room, "Chloe had a very rich old life. Not with money, but with something far more valuable, with ideas." I paused again, letting the word hang in the air. Ideas. I turned back to my brother. "Mark, you and Dad, you love to talk about the Preston touch, about the geniuses of your brand. You built an empire on it. But empires aren't just built on money. They are built on a foundational idea, a single, brilliant spark of creativity." The color was draining from Mark's face. He was starting to understand. He was no longer smiling. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. Chloe, in contrast, remained perfectly, terrifyingly calm. She hadn't moved a muscle. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. She was letting him squirm, letting him realize the trap he had walked into, the trap he had built for himself over years of lies and arrogance. The room was utterly still. The band had stopped playing. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every eye was locked on me, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I was more than happy to oblige. "My brother always said I was poor," I declared, my voice ringing with a confidence no one in that room had ever heard from me before. "And maybe he's right. I don't have a fancy title or a corner office. But I know that true wealth isn't what's in your bank account. It's what's in your head. It's ideas. Ideas like the brilliant, revolutionary designs that this family's entire company is built on." I let that statement sink in, a stone dropping into a silent pool. I could see the confusion on the faces of the guests, the dawning comprehension and terror on the faces of my family. My father looked like he was having a heart attack. My mother had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mark was white as a sheet, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. He was shaking his head, a tiny, almost imperceptible motion, as if he could deny what was happening through sheer force of will. "These ideas," I continued, my voice unwavering, "didn't come from a Preston touch. They didn't spring fully formed from my brother's mind. They came from sketchbooks and late nights in a university library. They came from the mind of a brilliant young designer who poured her heart and soul into a project long before she ever met my brother." I raised my glass, turning now to face Chloe directly. She looked back at me, and for the first time that evening, she allowed a small, triumphant smile to grace her lips. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The toast, the one they were all waiting for, was finally here. It wasn't a toast to their future, to their marriage, to their new life together. It was a eulogy for their lives. "So, I would like to propose a toast," I announced to the stunned and silent room. "A toast to the bride. A toast to Chloe's old life as an uncredited genius, and to her new life as the sole and legal copyright and trademark holder of every single creative asset in my brother's entire portfolio." I paused, letting the legal terms, the words they had dismissed as nerdy stuff, detonate in the center of the room. Then, for the grand finale, I delivered the killing blow, the line Chloe and I had rehearsed in our minds 1,000 times. "The cease and desist letters go out on Monday." For a full 10 seconds, there was absolute, profound silence. It was a vacuum, a void where the happy celebratory noise had been just moments before. The only movement was me, lowering my glass, and Chloe, who raised hers slowly, deliberately, and took a small, graceful sip, her eyes locked on her new husband's horrified face. The silence was then shattered. It wasn't by a guest's gasp or a confused murmur. It was by my father, who shot to his feet with such force that his chair crashed backwards onto the floor. "What did you say?" he roared, his face a mottled apoplectic purple. His voice, usually so smooth and commanding, was a raw, guttural bellow of rage and disbelief. All pretense of the sophisticated patriarch was gone, stripped away to reveal the panicked bully underneath. My mother started to sob, a series of high-pitched, hysterical gasps. "Alex, how could you? How could you do this? To your brother, to your family?" She wailed, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. But my attention was on Mark. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't moving. He was just staring. First at me, then at Chloe, his expression slack-jawed with the shock of a total system-wide failure. The confident, charming prince was gone. In his place was a terrified boy who had just watched his entire kingdom, his entire identity, evaporate into thin air. He turned to Chloe, his voice a desperate cracking whisper. Chloe, what is he talking about? Tell me he's lying. This is a joke, right? Some kind of sick, twisted joke? Chloe turned her head to face him fully, her expression no longer serene but cold as Arctic ice. No, Mark, she said, her voice quiet but carrying with absolute finality in the silent room. It's not a joke, it's my work, and I'm taking it back. That was the signal for all-out chaos. My father started toward the stage, his finger pointing at me, shouting something about lawyers and ruin and disinheritance. A few of the groomsmen loyal to Mark stood up, looking confused and angry. Wedding guests were on their feet, some backing away from the head table as if it were radioactive, others pulling out their phones to record the most spectacular wedding implosion they would ever witness. The dream had become a nightmare. The fairy tale had ended in a courtroom filing, and in the middle of it all, I just stood there, holding the microphone, a strange sense of calm washing over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the footnote. I wasn't the poor, pathetic brother. I was the one who held the truth, and the truth, it turned out, was the most valuable asset of all. Before my father could reach the stage, a path was cleared for me by the most unexpected of allies, Chloe's family. Her father, a large, quiet man I'd only met a handful of times, stepped in front of my own, blocking his path. He didn't say a word, just stood there, a silent, immovable wall. Chloe's sister, the tearful maid of honor from before, was now on her feet, her arm protectively around Chloe's shoulder, glaring at my mother with undisguised contempt. It was a tableau of shattered alliances. The two families, meant to be joined in celebration, were now squared off like rival armies. In that moment of chaotic paralysis, I looked at Chloe and nodded toward the exit. It was time to go. Our work here was done. She stood up, her movements fluid and unhurried. She carefully placed her napkin on the table beside her half-eaten dessert. Then, without a single backward glance at the man she had married less than 3 hours earlier, she walked toward me. Mark finally snapped out of his stupor. Chloe, wait, he cried, his voice breaking. Don't leave. We can fix this. We can talk about this. He started to go after her, but he was blocked by his own groomsmen, who were now trying to restrain my enraged father. The scene was pure pandemonium. As Chloe reached my side, I took her hand. Her hand was steady in mine. We turned and walked, not ran, through the stunned crowd of guests. The path parted for us as if we were royalty, or perhaps carriers of a terrible plague. Whispers and the frantic clicking of phone cameras followed us like a shockwave. We didn't look back. We walked past the towering, 5-tiered wedding cake, a monument to a future that would never happen. We walked past the gift table, piled high with presents they would now have to return. We walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving the wreckage of my family's reputation and my brother's life behind us. The moment the heavy oak doors swung shut, cutting off the sounds of shouting and crying, we were enveloped in the cool, quiet night air. For a moment, we just stood there on the stone steps, breathing. The adrenaline was still coursing through me, but it was mixed with an incredible, intoxicating sense of release. It was over. The lie was dead. So, Chloe said, breaking the silence, a hint of wry humor in her voice. I guess the honeymoon is off. I let out a laugh. A real, genuine laugh. It felt like I hadn't done that in years. I can't believe we actually did it, I said, looking at her. In the moonlight, I could see the immense strain of the last 2 years beginning to fall away from her face, replaced by a look of profound and hard-won freedom. She was no longer just the bride. She was the victor. We got into my unassuming sedan, a car my father had once called a rolling apology for a lack of ambition, and drove away from the sprawling estate, leaving the chaos in our rearview mirror. My phone started buzzing almost immediately, and it didn't stop for the next hour. The screen lit up with a relentless barrage of calls and texts. My mother, my father, Mark, my uncles, my aunts, a few cousins. It was the entire Preston clan, mobilizing in a panic. I ignored every single call. I put my phone on silent and tossed it onto the back seat. Chloe did the same. The silence in the car was a sanctuary. We drove for a while without speaking, the dark country road spooling out before us. We were in a strange limbo, a pocket of quiet between the explosion we had just detonated and the inevitable fallout that was to come. We ended up at my small, cluttered apartment, the place they all dismissed. The place that had been our secret headquarters. It felt like coming home. As I unlocked the door, Chloe paused on the threshold. Are you okay, Alex? She asked, her voice soft. They're your family. I thought about it for a moment, the word family feeling foreign and strange. They stopped being my family a long time ago, I said, and I was surprised by how true it felt. Tonight. Tonight was just making it official. The real question is, are you okay? You just blew up your life. She walked inside and looked around the room, at the whiteboard, still covered in notes from our legal strategy, at the stack of books on copyright law on my coffee table. She smiled, a small, genuine smile. My old life was a lie someone else wrote for me, she said. The one I'm starting tonight? It might be messy, but at least it will be my own. The rest of the night was spent in a state of surreal calm. We ordered pizza. We drank cheap beer from the bottle. We sat on the floor of my living room, fielding calls that we routed through a single, pay-as-you-go burner phone we had bought for this purpose. The first call was from her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman we had hired months ago. She confirmed the couriers were on standby for Monday morning. She was ready. The next calls were from Chloe's family, offering support, a place to stay, anything she needed. They were shocked, but they were on her side. The final calls of the night, the ones we steeled ourselves for, were the ones we allowed to go to voicemail just so we could have a record. We listened to my father's voice, no longer roaring, but low and menacing, promising to ruin me, to sue me into oblivion. We listened to my mother's tearful pleading, begging Chloe to reconsider, to think of the family. And we listened to Mark's message, a broken, rambling monologue filled with I love yous and how could yous and we can fix thises. It was the pathetic sound of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his entire life, finally meeting one he couldn't charm, bully, or buy his way out of. We listened to it all, and then we erased it. Monday morning arrived, not with a bang, but with a quiet hum of a well-oiled machine kicking into gear. At precisely 9:00 a.m., our lawyer confirmed that the cease and desist letters had been delivered by courier to the offices of Preston Innovations, to my father's home, and to Mark's new, empty marital home. The letters were unequivocal. They demanded an immediate halt to the use of all copyrighted and trademarked materials belonging to their legal owner, Chloe Marshall. She had already started the legal process of changing her name back. This included the company name, the logo, all marketing materials, the website, everything. The letters also included a preliminary summary of the evidence. The time-stamped files, the watermarks, the dated correspondence. It was a declaration of war backed by an overwhelming show of force. The immediate effect was paralysis. The company's board of directors, who had been blindsided by the news, called an emergency meeting. Their lawyers, upon reviewing the initial evidence, likely advised them that their position was utterly indefensible. The brand they had invested millions in was, overnight, a toxic asset. Their visionary young executive, Mark Preston, was a fraud. Their esteemed CEO, my father, was complicit in a massive intellectual property theft. The company's operations ground to a halt. They couldn't send an email from their branded accounts. They couldn't update their website. They couldn't legally use their own business cards. They were, for all intents and purposes, silenced, stripped of the very identity they had stolen. The news, as it always does in these situations, leaked. A junior employee at the firm, present during the wedding meltdown, tipped off a local business reporter. The story was too juicy to ignore. The dramatic wedding toast, the shocking allegations, the heir to a corporate empire accused of fraud by his own brother and his new bride. It became a local scandal, then a regional one. Then it was picked up by national trade publications. The narrative they had so carefully controlled was shattered, replaced by a far more compelling one. The story of a brilliant, wronged designer and the poor brother who helped her get justice. The empire of Preston Innovations didn't crumble in a day, but the mortal wound had been delivered. Its value was not in its client list or its office real estate, it was in its brand. And that brand was now a symbol of theft and scandal. It was worthless, and it belonged to Chloe. The weeks that followed were a maelstrom of legal, maneuvering, and desperate attempts at contact. The initial response from my family's lawyers was aggressive bluster, threatening countersuits for defamation and tortious interference. It was a standard tactic, a smokescreen, and it lasted all of a few days. Our lawyer simply responded by sending over a second, more detailed evidence package, including a forensic analysis of the watermarks and a timeline so precise it could be measured in minutes and seconds. The bluster stopped. Then came the second phase, pleading. My mother was the chosen emissary. She would leave long, tearful voicemails, not for me, but for Chloe. She spoke of forgiveness, of family, of the terrible misunderstanding that had torn us all apart. She begged Chloe to meet, to talk, to work this out like a family. She never once acknowledged the theft. In her version of reality, this was a personal spat that had gotten out of hand, a drama caused by my jealousy and Chloe's oversensitivity. Chloe never responded to her directly. All communication was routed through our lawyer, who repeatedly stated that our position was not open for negotiation. We were not interested in a settlement that involved a non-disclosure agreement or a quiet payout. This was about reclamation, not remuneration. Finally came the third phase, capitulation. A formal offer arrived from a new set of lawyers representing what was left of Preston Innovations. It was a surrender. They acknowledged Chloe's ownership of the intellectual property. They were prepared to discuss a licensing deal or an outright sale of the company's remaining assets to her. The power dynamic had been completely and irrevocably inverted. My father, the Titan, and Mark, the Crown Prince, were now supplicants, begging for terms from the two people they had dismissed and belittled. Throughout this time, I was also recalibrating my own life. I had to set firm, absolute boundaries. I changed my number. I blocked my entire family on every social media platform. I sent a single final email to my parents and my brother. I told them that their emotional and financial abuse was over. I explained that our relationship, as it had existed, was finished, and that any future contact would be on my terms, which, for the foreseeable future, meant no contact at all. It was the hardest and most liberating thing I have ever done. I was cutting off the only family I had ever known, but in doing so, I was finally freeing myself from the toxic role they had assigned me. I was no longer the footnote, the failure, the poor brother. I was Alex, and for the first time, that felt like enough. Several months have passed since the wedding. The dust is beginning to settle, revealing a new landscape. Chloe, in a move of pure poetic justice, refused to sell her intellectual property back to them. Instead, she formed her own company. Using the initial legal settlement to fund her startup, she is now in the process of building a new brand from the ashes of the old one, but this time, doing it ethically. She has a small, brilliant team, a growing list of clients who were impressed by her story and her undeniable talent and complete creative control. She offered me a job as her head of digital security and operations, and I accepted. For the first time, I am part of building something, and my skills are not just valued, but essential. My family's company, stripped of its brand, was forced into a fire sale. They sold off their client lists and office furniture for pennies on the dollar before dissolving the corporation in disgrace. My father was forced into an early, ignominious retirement. My mother has withdrawn from the society circles she so loved, the shame being too much to bear. And Mark? From what I hear, he is a ghost. The divorce was quick and uncontested. He lost his job, his wife, and his reputation in a single night. The empire he was supposed to inherit was built on sand, and the tide came in. I don't feel joy at their downfall. Instead, I feel a quiet, profound sense of peace. The anger that fueled me for so long has cooled, leaving behind a hard-won clarity. I've learned that self-worth isn't something that's given to you by your family or your boss. It's something you build yourself out of your own talents, your own principles, your own choices. My wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in my integrity, my skills, and my loyalty to the people who truly see me. My relationship with Chloe has evolved. We are partners, co-founders, and the closest of friends, bonded by the shared trauma and the shared triumph. We healed by building something new together. We are both in therapy, individually and sometimes together, working through the complex emotional fallout of it all. It's a process. Healing is not a destination, but a journey. But for the first time, the path forward is clear, and it's a path we are choosing for ourselves. We are no longer defined by their lies, but by our own truth. So, that's the story of how my brother's wedding toast backfired and cost him his entire company. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who seem the poorest are the ones holding the most valuable assets of all: truth, skill, and the courage to use them. For anyone out there who has ever been underestimated, belittled, or had their contributions dismissed, I want you to know this: your value is not determined by someone else's inability to see your worth. Your nerdy hobbies, your quiet passions, your unique skills, those are your superpowers. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for the things that make you powerful. True wealth is owning your own story, and sometimes that means you have to burn down the old one to write a new, better chapter. It's not an easy path, and it requires setting boundaries that can feel painful at first, but the freedom on the other side is worth everything. The cease and desist letters may not always be literal, but sometimes they are a necessary metaphor for taking back your own life. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe for more content, and share your own stories of vindication in the comments below. Never forget to invest in yourself, because you are your own greatest asset.